Welcome to Financial Planning Explained. I'm your host, Mike Menninger, certified financial planner, owner and founder of Menninger Associates Financial Planning. I'm pleased to have Nick DeVito, also a CFP and also an equity owner and partner of the firm. Nick, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Today's topic is going to talk about pensions. There are not a lot of them around anymore, seemingly. Mostly you see them from governments, but you do have still some companies, large companies still have them. A lot of them have stopped doing them, everything else like that. So what we're going to be talking about in this episode, I can clearly see there's enough to talk about that this may take 2 episodes to complete. But what we're going to do is talk about underlying pensions. And so I want to give the history of the pension, so to speak. Pension plans were very commonplace decades ago, basically prior to 2000, with large corporations. And in fact, I take a look at my parents, or certainly my dad. Back then, so much different than today, where I look at that generation of folks who worked in the 50s, the 60s, 70s, and 80s. You graduate high school or you graduate college, you get a job, and you're working for that company for your whole career.
Yeah.
And there was a tremendous amount more loyalty between companies and individuals. But what we also found is that in 2000, as well as 2008, companies got out of the pension business, and I can elaborate on that a little bit. But I recall some stats. In 1995, if you took a look at the largest 100 U.S. companies, 87 of them had pensions. But you advanced to 2000, and only 50 of the 100 largest companies in the U.S. had pension plans. Now, mind you, it may not be the same top 100. I think we've seen that the top 10 largest companies, only one of them is the top 10 largest today, but that's from the late 90s. But so again, in 1995, we had 87 of the largest 100. 50 had pensions in 2000. And by 2005, only 17 of the largest companies had pensions. Now, this is taking a look at private corporations, the likes of IBM, because that's where my father worked. That's the one that sticks out in my head. But we're seeing it a lot, that companies had pensions, and we were talking about this just last night with someone that we're working with, that their pension canceled in 2004. So that's just showing it. And why is it? 2 basic reasons is that basically the loyalty aspect, but the companies don't want to have this liability on their books, because what happens is the pension's on their books as a liability. And the problem is that they were funding the pensions out of their own cash flow and profits. And subsequently, people are living longer. And then we had the market take a beating in 2000. And when the market took a beating in 2000, it was a double-edged sword, where they're required, because they have certain regulations with the government, to maintain funding of that pension. And 2 things happen. Number one, the value of the stocks that the pension held fell almost 50%, which means the companies were in tough shape. And they had to cough up more money to fund the pensions at a time that the companies were getting smoked. And they're like, we're done with this. And that's when it really began to unravel. It was starting to unravel and really began to unravel in the early 2000s.
And yeah, since then, what honestly you've seen is a shift more towards the onus being on the employee to save for retirement, not even just from the companies, but even from our government.
Right.
I mean, you had Secure 2.0, which came out in 2022, which incentivized businesses to start retirement plans. It gives you all these great tax credits, and it's another shift of there's potentially issues lurking out there with Social Security. The government wants people to be saving for retirement, not the government, not the companies. And you've seen that shift over the last 25 years and really accelerate even more in the past few years.
Well, you even talked back in the early 2000s, President Bush was actually trying to privatize Social Security because he saw, and this isn't really the design of it, but Social Security in its own way is like a pension too.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been a lot of changes, and the long and short of it is there are still pensions that are still around. We talk about PACERS, which is the public school employee retirement system. I can't believe I just drew a blank on that. I mean, we deal with PACERS all the time, but it's generally your governmental organizations that are the leaders in still providing pensions. But why don't you talk about what is a pension?
Yeah, I think what's important to first differentiate is a defined benefit versus a defined contribution plan. So a pension is a defined benefit, meaning you are getting a benefit. There's there's always a formula behind the benefit. Typically, it's your years of service times some multiple times an average salary. Now, a lot of times you'll see every company is going to have a different multiple. Every company is going to have a different way they calculate final average salary. Sometimes it'll be your highest 3 years at any point. It could be your highest 5 consecutive years. It really comes down to the individual pension, and you can find all of that information in the summary plan description for your pension. That's the rule book of the pension. That's going to tell you everything there is to know. You have the defined contribution. I'll briefly touch on that. That's not really what this episode's about, but the defined contribution is going to be your other retirement plans. A 401k is a defined contribution. You're putting money in, and whether or not it grows depends on the investments that are in it. Whereas the pension, it's a guaranteed sum of money or a guaranteed income source. The defined contribution is not guaranteed. And to Mike's point earlier, you see companies switching away from the defined benefit, moving towards the defined contribution, where they're doing the 401ks now. And yes, they're going to provide a match, but once they provide that match, their hands are clear. They don't have to worry about anything else. So that's why you're seeing that shift. So like I said, the common formula you'll see for pensions, years of service times a multiple times a final average salary. And that'll come up with what your maximum single life annuity is. And what that is the amount that if you were to collect your own pension, that you'd be getting on a monthly basis. And that's what really is, that's the baseline for all pensions. That's going to be the base number. That's what your formula is going to actually calculate. And then there's different variations that come off that, whether you're taking survivorship options, lump sum. We'll talk a little bit more about that.
There's a lot to talk about with regards to the summary plan description because there are a ton of nuances as it pertains to the pension benefit. Again, it's almost always just those 3 variables: number of years, final salary, and times a multiplier. But know the rules, because I've always said he who knows the rules the best usually does better at the game.
Yes.
And so I've seen 3 highest years, 3 highest consecutive years, or final 3 years. And that is something that's really interesting, is that hypothetically, if they looked at your final 3 years, which usually are the highest 3 years. But what do you do if it defines the final 3 years and you move from a higher level job to a lower level job, or you reduce your income? You're actually reducing your benefit. Okay. Similarly, I've also seen plans where you use your highest consecutive years or your 3 highest years. And you'll see that a lot in the teacher's profession, because a lot of teachers do extracurricular activities, whether it be teaching summer school, teaching or coaching sports, et cetera, that flows in. I've also seen it where I've had underemployed individuals. They have a master's degree and they're serving as a teacher's assistant, and they've done that for 20-something years. All they got to do is flip to a higher paying job for their final 3 years. It's as if they're at it for the entire time. And then the other nuances of early reduction and things along that nature. And there are so many nuances, but I kind of went away from it. So talk back where you were, how the pensions work. So it becomes a payout.
Yes.
That the calculation says this is how much you're going to get.
Yep.
If you retire for the rest of your life. Now, talk about some of the other nuances.
Yeah, so I mean, we touched on it a little bit earlier, but the contributions generally are made by the employer for pensions. Now, sometimes the employee is required to contribute, but a lot of times the onus and majority of the contributions are coming from the employer. To Mike's point, the summary plan description is really important because that's going to tell you everything you need to know. One of those things you're going to want to know is there a vesting schedule for the pension? Almost all pensions are going to have a vesting schedule. The vesting schedule is how long do you need to be with that company before you are vested, which means you actually receive the benefit. So to Mike's point, knowing the rules is very important. I mean, it's very unlikely that you're going to go to a job today that you're going to find a pension unless it's a governmental agency. But if you do, and maybe the vesting is 5 years, you need to be with that company for 5 years before you're able to actually receive the benefit. And you're there for 4.5 and you're thinking about switching, maybe hang on for that extra half a year. Little nuances like that. All pensions, and goes back to the summary plan description, they're going to have a normal retirement age. Usually ranging 60 to 65. I would say usually 60 is on the low end. I don't see many normal retirement ages of 60. I would say 60 to 67 is a more accurate range, or 62 to 67, excuse me, is a more accurate range. And that, to Mike's point, that's going to be the calculation we used, that's going to determine your full retirement age amount. If you take it early, there is generally going to be a reduction in the benefit that you receive. And that's all outlined in the summary plan description. Oftentimes you'll see, it depends. Sometimes if you have a certain number of years of service, your early retirement is different. You know, if you have 30 years of service or 25 years of service, you'll see that sometimes where you're not being reduced as harshly as someone who only has 10 years of service. So it really goes back to understanding how your pension works, a summary plan description. And there is planning opportunities around that, because a lot of times what people don't realize is the language within the pension document, sometimes they'll use the word retirement date. Right? And people think, okay, well, that's when I stop working. But a lot of times when you see the word retirement date, what they really mean is the date you actually begin collecting the benefit. Because you may have retired when you're 60, but if your full retirement age for your pension is 65 and you don't collect it until 65, well, you're not getting reduced because you retired at 60. You'd only get reduced if you began collecting it at 60. And that's an important distinction I see people oftentimes get hung up on.
So the 65 is one of the more common ones for full retirement age. And the reason is it's archaic. Until probably 20, maybe 25 years ago, full retirement age for Social Security was 65. And then at some point, they changed it to full retirement age of 66. And then more recently, I say more recently, probably 15 years ago at least, they changed the retirement age to 67. So you look back at that 65 where you see that throughout most pensions, that just shows you how old the pension plans are as far as the language and how they've been built. So to your point, understanding the rules can be very, very important, and the nuances, because I've seen combined age and years of service. I've seen number of years of service. If you're above a certain threshold, then your retirement age is above, it changes.
Well, not even that. Oftentimes you'll see there's different years where if you were with the company before 2011, your pension's one way. If you're between I had this with last Friday with a client where if you were there prior to 2011, you got a certain formula and there were certain ages and fun stuff. Then from 2011 to 2018, there was a certain formula and a certain full retirement age. And then from 2018 on, there was a new one. So it really can change. Even if you're in the same pension program for the same company, it may be different for you versus me. So It really goes back to understanding how your pension actually operates.
Well, we just bumped into one this weekend where the pension plan closed at the end of 2004. And if you were under the age of 50 at the end of 2004, then this is your formula. Yeah. If you're over the age of 50, then this is your formula. And there's just so many nuances that again, it's really, really important to understand the rules of it as evidenced and written in the summary plan description.
And just to quickly touch on that too, is sometimes what you'll see is they may stop the pension. That could mean that your benefits are still accruing, or it can mean your benefits stop accruing. Sometimes you'll see, okay, well, new people aren't allowed to get into the pension, but if you're grandfathered in, you're still going to be accruing a benefit. Or sometimes they'll freeze it, where they say, okay, we're not doing the pension anymore. Even if you're in it, yep, you still get the pension, but it's not going to accumulate any more value. There's no more years of service are going to be added. Your salary is not going to matter. And sometimes when that happens, you'll have the opportunity to roll it out if the pension becomes frozen. I helped someone out with that not too long ago, where they froze the pension and she came to me and she said, what should I do with it? I said, okay, let's take a look at the options. We took a look at the options and it made sense to just get it out.
Right.
It really all depends on your situation.
So let's talk about some more things associated with the pension when we come back. So stay tuned. We'll be back with you in just a few moments.
Do you keep up regularly with your investments? Where exactly are your hard-earned dollars going? Are you financially prepared for an emergency?
I'm Mike Menninger, founder of Menninger Associates Financial Planning. We believe that education and knowledge are powerful, and we want our clients to understand why we are making the recommendations that we make. It's your money, and you deserve to know where it's going, because it's not how much you make, it's how much you keep. So call us today to discuss your financial concerns. Welcome back. And as we continue on with the pensions, Nick had just talked about meeting with someone last week where they took a look at a frozen pension where they were able to roll it out. Even then, looking back at the summary plan description, sometimes they don't let you roll it out if you're still working there, or sometimes they don't let you roll it out except if you've turned age 59 and a half or 65. Again, this goes back to the summary plan description. But let's talk about, when I say roll it out, what does that mean? Some companies allow, in lieu of taking the monthly benefit, often referred to as the annuity, because what is annuity? An annuity is a stream of payments. So a lot of people think of it as their annuity. So there's an alternative option some allow, is for you, in lieu of taking the annuity, you can take a lump sum distribution. You want to pick it up from there?
Yeah. So like I said this in the first part of this episode, was that all of the values you see are going to be based off your single life annuity, and the lump sum is based off of your single life annuity. What they take a look at is they say, okay, essentially what they're trying to figure out, how they calculate that lump sum, is they take a look at what your pension's $4,000 a month. There is tables and rates that are published by the IRS on a monthly basis, and they use those tables and rates to determine how much would we need to put into an account to fund your $4,000 a month for the rest of your life. And the tables that are published by the IRS are going to be, there's two tables. There's going to be a life expectancy table. That's how they determine, okay, if we're putting money into this bucket for you, how long are you actuarially going to live for? And it's all actuarially based. The second is going to be the interest rates. And the IRS, like I said, publishes that on a monthly basis, and they actually publish it in three tranches, if you will. There's a short, intermediate, and long-term rate. So the short rate may be 0 to 5 years. I'm just throwing that out there. The intermediate may be 5 to 15, and then the long is 15 plus. And how they actually come up with that lump sum is they say, okay, well, if you're 60 years old and we estimate you're going to live till 80, that means there's 20 years where you'd be collecting the benefit. So the first 5 years gets tagged with that short rate. The next 10 years gets tagged with that intermediate rate, and so on. So that's how they actually calculate it. It's a very complex calculation. Now, like I said, tables get released on a monthly basis. Oftentimes the companies will actually calculate the new lump sum on an annual basis. They could, if they wanted to, do it more often, but it's just a hassle for them. So they really like to do it once a year. But it's important to note, because of how that calculation is, interest rates really can affect the lump sum of your pension. And I know we were aware of this, but I think it really came to our forefront a couple years back. And very simply, when interest rates are higher, the lump sum of your pension is lower. When interest rates are lower, the lump sum of your pension is higher. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because if interest rates are higher, and that's what they're basing off how much we have to put in that bucket for you, well, then they have to put less in the bucket. I'll use the two extremes. If interest rates, I'll start with the lower. If interest rates are 0% and they need to pay you $100,000 a year for 20 years, well, that's $1 million or $2 million that they have to put into that bucket for you because they're not earning any interest. So if they're paying you $100,000 a year, they need to have $100,000 a year ready for you, and they're not earning interest. If interest rates are 100%, well, then they only need to put $100,000 into that bucket for you because your $100,000 is going to make $100,000, and then they can pay you. So there's an inverse relationship there, and it's very important. I don't know if you want to dive a little bit more on the example we had a couple years ago because it was very drastic.
It was shocking. A client had come to us, maybe 52 years old, and had 3 or 4 different options where they said, if I were to leave at age 55, my lump sum is this. If I were to leave at age 58, my lump sum is this. And if I were to leave at age 60, my lump sum is this. And he was targeting one of those dates. And I remember it was like November, December, whatever, when we first met with them.
November of 2021.
Yes.
Yeah. Or was it 22? It
I know.
might have been 22.
It was 22.
You're right. It was 22.
It was 22. So, because it was based on 21 rates.
Exactly. Yeah, you're right.
So the lump sum benefit was $2.2 to $2.3 million, somewhere in that range. And then when we met with them again in February, he produced the lump sum, and the new lump sum was to the tune of $1.6 million. It dropped almost 1/3 because of the interest rates had jumped so high from 21 to 22 because of all of the inflation that we had. It crushed the lump sum and actually impacted his decision to retire.
Well, and that is a planning consideration. Now, 2022 is a very extreme example of that because interest rates basically went from 0 to almost 5 in a year. So that was a very extreme example, but it is something to consider. If interest rates, if you anticipate, and obviously no one has a crystal ball for that, I wish we did, but if you anticipate interest rates are going to skyrocket, well, then maybe try to grab your lump sum. If you're going to do lump sum, maybe grab it a little earlier, and vice versa. If you know interest rates have been coming down drastically throughout the year, well, then hold off and wait, because to my point earlier, usually they calculate on an annual basis, and it's typically in the beginning of the year. So if you know from January to December of the previous year, interest rates were really coming down, well, then you might get a higher lump sum if you were to look in January.
So it's also interesting, and I have one example of this, of a client who worked for Wyeth and went a number of years. Actually, I think there was it was another company, it was American Cyanamid, then it was Wyeth, then it was Pfizer. And what we found was the calculations for the lump sum benefit actually varied based on the 3 different companies, whereby what we did is we took a look at the value of the lump sum and then compared it to the distribution of the monthly benefit. And it was really weird how one of them stuck out, where the lump sum was extraordinarily high relative to the other 2. But part of that was because of the fact that it was considered no reduction for early retirement for that sleeve of it. And so there was just so many nuances, which goes back again to understanding how everything is calculated before making a decision, because sometimes, or a lot of times, the lump sum benefit can be put away reasonably safe and distribute almost as much, if not more than what the benefit would have been as the pension or the annuity.
Well, that's something we run into all the time with pensions is people come and ask us, what should I do? Should I take the monthly or should I take the lump sum? And to Mike's point, one of the things we like to do is figure out that break even. Saying, okay, if we take this, let's say you want your pension's lump, your $4,000 a month is what they're going to give you versus the lump sum you can take and roll out into an IRA. We say, okay, how long, if we take that bucket of money and we were to give you $4,000 a month from that bucket of money, how long would that last you? And essentially that's your break-even age of, okay, if you live for 20 years, your $4,000 a month, you're no longer going to be able to take from that lump sum bucket. So kind of being able to show that, you're going to want to probably assign some sort of growth rate to the investment, because the reality is the investment, if you were to roll it out, it's going to be invested, it's going to be growing. But that's really kind of the starter. And then the other reason we suggest one or the other, it really depends on their situation. But the one thing I do like about the lump sum is the flexibility that it provides. And we talk about this with every client that we talk about pensions with is, okay, you can have $4,000 a month, but what if you need $5,000 a month? Too bad, you're getting $4,000. And vice versa. What if you're getting $4,000? What if you only need $2,000 that month? Too bad, you're getting $4,000. So what the lump sum does is it provides a level of flexibility for you to decide and control the distribution of your assets instead of it being forced as this is how much you're going to have to take.
Not to mention the death benefit. Rule of thumb, single life annuity. If I'm taking a benefit, an annuity or pension as a defined benefit, if I die, it's gone. Or if I have it set aside that if I die, there's a survivor benefit, which we're going to talk about in the next episode, because this is clearly going into two, is, the money's gone. At least with a lump sum distribution, if I pass or I and my spouse pass, there's still money left over for the next generation. So to your point, I like the lump sum, but again, we compare the calculations, and I've seen some pensions really distribute a very nice value. But the other thing to take into consideration is the level of need that a client has. Sometimes it's nice to take the annuity benefit because what it does is it fulfills their basic needs on a monthly basis if they have a lot of other assets. So again, which you do, the answer to every financial planning question is?
It depends.
There you go. So we'll be back with you. We're going to pick up and do another episode on this. So stay tuned. We'll be back with you. Thank you for joining us. If you do have any pension, you have situations on your own that you would like to have explored, we'll be delighted to spend the time with you. You're welcome to call us at 610-422-3773, or you may visit our website, which is www.maaplanning.com. Thank you for joining us and have a wonderful day.